Hi, everyone. I am here in the Northeast, in a very snowy Northeast, and our very special guest comes to us from a very sunny Southwest. But that is the country that we live in. It has both the highs and the lows, and I am so excited. First, I want to say to everybody who's been through these snowstorms in the last few days, please be safe. Please do not shovel if you have a heart condition, for example. Please get somebody else to shovel for you. Please be safe. We need you. We love you. We want you to be around, and we want to make sure that everybody enjoys tonight. And the reason I'm so excited is that one of my most favorite people in the world has been the Vice President of the United States of America. Now, there's been about 49 Vice Presidents of the United States of America, but she held that office from 2021 to 2025. And she did that, and I watched it close up with tremendous grit and motivation and brightness and compassion and smartness and fidelity to the promise of America. A promise that when she was at our convention, I think it was day 103, it was like day 3 or 4, talked to our members about why she was running and was willing to run at that last minute for the presidency of the United States of America. And for those who don't know who I'm talking about yet and can't recognize her from the screen, I'm talking about Vice President Kamala Harris, who ran for president and has this amazing book that's been out for a while. It actually came out, I don't know if you know this, Madam Vice President, your book came out the Tuesday after my book came out. My book came out the week before. Yeah, that was mine. This was yours. And it was just a joy to read it when it came out. And for everybody who is listening, we, like on a lark, we said, well, maybe we can get the vice president to do one of our monthly book clubs. And the vice president said, as she always did, to trade unionists, to children, to teachers, she always said yes, and she said yes for this as well. So we're so delighted that you're here. And I want to start with the questions in a second, but I want to just make sure that I give you enough of a proper introduction, which is that the vice president didn't just zoom into being the vice president. She had been the former California Attorney General. She was a United States Senator. She had started her career not only as a prosecutor, but actually understood what the job of a prosecutor was, to actually be the work of the government was to ensure that people had second chances, that you could reduce recidivism, that you could actually get criminals to be in jail, but people who are not criminals to be out in the streets and actually free to have the promise of America. And watching her career from California, watching how she took on corporations that ought to be taken on, watching how she took on people in Congress when she held hearings, she was more equipped to be vice president and president than almost anyone else I know in these United States of America. And the fact that she took this job to run and get within a whisker of being that president, there is a grateful nation, including myself and so many of our other members, Madam Vice President, and we are honored not only for being here tonight, but really, we are honored by your service to the country, by your service to people, by lifting up children, and by really believing every single day that any of us have seen you for all these years in that promise of America. And with that, I want to say welcome to our monthly book club.
Thank you, Randi, Madam President. Thank you. And to AFT, let me just say, first of all, Randi, thank you for your leadership and your friendship and all that you have done and the courage that you show, especially in moments where the struggle is so severe and important. And to all the members of the AFT, I thank you. I know what you do every day. I love you. You all are, you're part of the conscience of America. And I know we're going to get into a conversation, but your role in what we need to do at this moment and what we need to do the day after this moment is so critically important. And so I thank everyone for the sacrifices you make on a daily basis to do the work you do. And it's my honor to be with the group. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we, and you wouldn't be surprised that I would say, I mean, I don't think you'd be surprised that I would say that your book was riveting. And even those of us who were around the campaign, I think what you did was you gave us a sense of, also your basic humanity, and that, and what is behind that gorgeous smile, and what is behind, all the days that you were doing this work. And I think you gave us a very intimate, endearing, not only opening, but the choices that you made in what you revealed for the 107 days. I'm sure, knowing you, it was intentional, the choices that you made. But I love the beginning with your nieces demanding pancakes, even before the call from President Biden. And so the kind of again and again going back to talking about family. So I think that the first question I really wanted to ask was, I mean, it's clear from the stories you also told about your mom and about you and Maya growing up, that family is so important. But how did you decide to make that choice as the way you started opening the book?
Well, it's how it all went down. So I wrote the book as basically, Brandy, but as it's a journal of those 107 days, and each chapter is a specific day. And so what's been interesting is some people have told me that if they keep a journal, they've been looking at what was happening in their life on that day and the symmetry around what might have been happening during those 107 days. But the first day of it all, July 21st, was a Sunday. And my niece, who is like a daughter to me, was staying with us, she and her husband and their two daughters. I call them my baby nieces. And I had been campaigning the day before for the Biden-Harris ticket. I was actually in P-Town, which they had this big poster and they called it VP Town, for a big event. And I got back late that night and I promised the kids that we would have pancakes and sausages and everything the next morning. And so I start the book by talking about that. And actually, Amara, the elder of the two, she and I had a little contract where she wrote out, because I didn't get home until like well after midnight, wake up auntie at 7:30. Because we had an agreement she would not wake me up before then. And so I start the book by talking about that morning, and it was just a normal morning. I'm in sweats. We're, having breakfast. Then after, I was playing a puzzle with the kids, and, that's one of the best things to do with children of that age because it just keeps them riveted. And then Joe called, the president called, and everything changed. Everything changed. Wow. But there I was, literally in sweats, practically with maple syrup on my fingers, when I got the call from him. So life was happening, and then that happened.
Right. Oh my God. And so
it balances things out too. I mean, that's where it's just wonderful to have family of whatever age in your life to just kind of keep everything real, right? And that's right. And whether it's Doug, my husband, the kids, I mean, we our house tends to be the place where family just comes and stays, and I love to cook, and it's very grounding.
So my wife and I now bring everybody, like all of the grandkids and the great nieces and great nephews. We do like 1 week in July, right, out in, all the way in Eastern Long Island for the same
Uh-huh.
exact reason. And when I
Right.
read, you've spoken about this a lot, but the whole just you essentially brought us in to your life by talking about the pancakes and the kids. And I think it was a really great way not only to start your book, but I also think it was a really great way of people seeing you. And I would say, and I'll go to some heavy duty questions in a second, but I think that what happens in America a lot is people do not actually understand that there are people behind the jobs that they're in.
Yeah.
And I think
Right.
it was really, and so, that it was just wonderful that you could do that and to show you. And I think and I suspect that when you're on the book tour all over the country, you're getting that kind of reaction that
Yeah.
hit me when I read that.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been in public office a long time, whether DA, Attorney General, US Senator, and then Vice President. And even though I am a public figure, I've tended to be very private about my private life. I
Exactly.
just, to
Exactly.
keep it safe, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
And I was probably more, I know I was more candid and sharing more about my private life than I ever have before. And because I felt it was important, I wrote this book after I came back from DC, came back to California, and I guess there was an aspect of writing it that was, very cathartic. And this is what, and I wrote what it was, and it was, I have in there, Doug still is kind of dealing with this. I have in there a whole story about my birthday. It was a big birthday, and how Doug and I got in a little bit of a thing, a little, spat, if you will. And, but all this stuff is real. The pressures of life and the strain that puts on your relationship with your partner, with your family, but the joys and the pains of it all, it's real. And I was hoping in that way I could make the process accessible. I think, Randi, also, your members know, and you always fight for this to help people understand the connection between politics, elections, and people's
Exactly.
everyday lives. And it's so direct. And
Exactly.
and but there is so much about the system that is so opaque. And in
Exactly.
particular when you're running for president, right? So who is president of the United States? Evidently, as we know, affects people in a profound way in terms of what it can do to make them suffer more or to alleviate their pain and lift them up. But the process for running for president is pretty opaque. Like, you don't, and so I wrote the book to kind of, pull up the hood on it and show a little bit about how it works and what's involved.
Right. But what it also did, and this gets to the connection, but this gets to kind of my next question, which is you in this moment of all of this disinformation and misinformation in terms of social media, it makes people into it creates a vision of people. It creates an avatar that you're just not. And what I think you did in 107 days is that you showed people who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I think, for at least for me, that was a really important giving that I think that that's why I think you're seeing so many people basically, like we saw, like thousands of people registered for this book club, more than have registered for others, because I think you created some way of showing who you are, and I think people want to say thank you to you. And I think
But
that
Randi,
that's part of the that's part of, and I promise we'll go and do all the political things, but I think these days in politics, the human connection has
Yeah.
been lost, which is part of the reason, as crazy as it seems to me, that Trump got elected twice. There's some weird human connection that he has with people.
Well, to your earlier point, here's one of the reasons I wrote the book, and there are many, includes that I know how people felt, those people who felt a connection to our campaign.
Right.
I know what it did. I could feel it. It fed me as much as whatever the campaign did to feed other people. And part of the reason I wrote the book is to remind us of how we felt, because here's the thing, that's inside everyone, right? I didn't just
Exactly.
bring that. The way I think about it is that we all have light inside of us. We all have light inside of us, and we cannot let any one individual or election dampen or diminish that light. And especially in moments of darkness, that light has to be the thing that shines, on this path through darkness. And it was important to me, and even during the book tour and convening people, to bring people together to remember that's inside of us. And let's see it there, let's see it in each other, and let that guide us through the stuff that we're dealing with right now, right?
So I have to tell you, the first, thank you for that. I do think that notion of light is so important, and that notion of hope, and hope that's honest. Hope that's not, that's more to something that's real and authentic. But I would say that day that you came, and look, we were pretty audacious. We're like, oh no, we want you in person. Yes, it's the third day of your campaign, but we really want you.
Yeah.
And okay, I admit it was really audacious on our part, but we were the first one to endorse you, and I will never forget the call that you and I had. And I said, "Oh yeah, we've endorsed you already."
I called you on the first day, Randy. I called you on the day Joe called me.
Yes,
Yes.
And when you called, I remember saying, "Oh, we've endorsed you already."
Yep.
And so
AFT is the first endorsement I got in that race for president. And just to put a fine point on it, it is because of everything everyone on this call and others did. It was historic what we did together. And AFT was the first to endorse that whole thing. And I'm so grateful to all the members and to you.
And let me just tell you that in between, when we heard that, President Biden had talked to you, and the phone call that you made to me, in between those several hours, you had to hear the excitement of our executive council. It had a long conversation the day before about what ifs, but people wanted to immediately do an emergency meeting. They wanted us to change the whole convention so that we would make this front and center. We thought it was really important because of your relationship with children, because of the importance of public education to you, because of the importance of education, because of the importance of democracy. And so we kind of moved heaven and earth. And this came from the leaders around the country. And they were not waiting. They were just like, no, we're going to do this. And I want you to know that, because it was a testament to who you've been and what you've done. And then when you came that day and talked about the story of your first grade teacher, I think, and that
Wilson. Yes.
And that she had gone to
your elementary school.
Exactly. And that she had gone to your graduation.
Graduation. Yeah.
And then your story at the end of the book about Michelle Causey. I don't know if I've said her name right. And that you went to her graduation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so that kind of connection Talk a bit, if you would, about why that connection to teachers and to kids is so important to you.
So I'll start by saying this. Throughout my career in the various positions I've had, my teams will tell you that when they walk into my office with some great idea about what a public policy proposal, and no matter how complex and how big it sounds, one of the first questions I ask them is, tell me how it will affect a child.
Yes.
Children have always been at the center for me of really measuring the impact, the relevance, the benefit of anything I do. And, you know, I was very blessed, very fortunate to grow up with many teachers in my life, whether it was Mrs. Shelton, who ran the nursery school that we lived on in the apartment above her nursery school, and she was basically the matriarch for the neighborhood. And I used to go and work down there in the after school program that she ran, and just seeing how she would sit down invariably with some single parent who was late to pick up their kids because they couldn't get out of work. And then that parent would start crying and telling Miss Shelton about the challenges they were facing and how that was impacting their child. And so at a young age, also being very well aware that you cannot think about the well-being of a child without also thinking about the context in which that child is being raised, and that if you care about the well-being of the child, you also need to care about the well-being of the parent. Whether it was, again, Mrs. Wilson, my first grade teacher, you know, I have joked that I had, you know, whether it was my parents or extended family, you know, as I said at the convention speech, my family, I have two forms of my family by blood and family by love, and they are family equally. And I was raised in an environment where the adults in our life would tell the kids we were special. Randi, we were not particularly special, but they told us we were special, and we believed them.
Exactly.
And right. And so
exactly.
all of that. I mean, you know, I have always felt, and it's been a source of frustration and probably my fight for many things, that, you know, these very important people who walk around and have these very important titles, especially in elected office, they think, you know, there's taking on the big issues and then there's taking on children's issues, instead of understanding that if we can come to terms with the well-being of our children, their education, supporting the ecosystem that makes that happen, our teachers, our people who are in the educational system, we will take on the big issues, right? And so I've always felt this way, and it's because of how I was raised, the context in which I was raised, what I have seen in my life, a lived experience. And that's why teachers are so important to all of us, to me, but to all of us, especially now. I mean, when I think about not only the needs of our children, but in particular, so writ large, and of course, teachers play a role that is, yes, about being an educator, but you're also, you know, the counselor, you're also a parent advisor, you are also half the time figuring out how to try to diagnose what might be an issue around the mental health needs of children, the physical, medical needs of children. All of those things our teachers are doing and not getting paid nearly enough for it, and usually coming out of their own back pockets to help pay for school supplies and all of that. And so all of that being the case, in particular, I'm just going to, for this moment of this conversation, place an emphasis on the education piece of it. We are dealing with a profound amount of misinformation and disinformation in our society right now. Spewed by the President of the United States, spewed by what social media is facilitating, spewed, you know, and on, right? And part of the antidote to that is to have systems that we support that educate the people from their earliest stage of life about fact and
Exactly.
history and civics and the importance of a social contract that is based on, as I call it, and this is part of what I'm advocating for. I think we need a project of civic renewal. And who's going to play one of the most important roles in that? Our teachers, right?
Exactly
Which
right.
is because we've got some real work to do. And yes, we have to win the midterms, and I'm going to do everything in my power to help that happen. We also have to be ready for the fact that I don't know if it may get worse before it gets better, okay? But at some point, we're going to be dealing, at least with the end of this administration, and there's going to be a whole lot of debris. And when we are looking at that, we have to be ready for that moment and also be honest and clear-eyed that when we're looking at that debris, we can't counsel a perspective that's about, okay, so let's rebuild in a way that is nostalgic. Because by the way,
Exactly.
the way it was working wasn't working for a lot of people to start. And
Exactly.
so we have to be, and that's going to require us to, one, educate society about what the needs are, what was working and what wasn't, and then participate in a project of civic renewal that is also about how we will build back trust, how we
Exactly.
will do that, understanding that mis and disinformation plays a role in distrust. And frankly, we're not going to necessarily be able to count on, big media to do the job that needs to get done, to get people the information they need to feel a sense of their power and the
Exactly.
power of the people in a system that seems to not be working for the best interest of the majority of people. Part of what's wrong right now is that, and teachers have always been fighting to advocate for seeing what's happening. But increasingly, we have seen a concentration of power in America, a concentration of power among political power and economic power. And that's part of what has led to the distrust and therefore cynicism that so many people have about whether they have power in the system to actually make a difference. And again, the role of teachers on this point is going to be, and has always been, very important.
I love what you just said in terms of civic renewal, and I can hear the kind of frustration, which in watching the last few days of the campaign, I saw in terms of just, President Biden, I was doing it, but the generals, the country had no real clue about what authoritarianism is. It had no real clue about what fascism is. And I see that in the work that I've done since, in the book I wrote and in my book talks, that there's a sense of that everything up until now, this mythical past, was so great and so wonderful, and yet all these people who are left behind got really angrier and angrier, and as a result, didn't understand that democracy, rather than any kind of democratic backsliding, becomes one of the most important things we have. And watching how misinformation and disinformation both created anger and apathy, and watching you kind of try to get through it and bust through it. I wanted to take the TV sometimes and just shake it because of what you were saying and what was said. So it's interesting to me to hear. We can take this slide down. We don't have to see my book. Thank you. What was interesting though is what you just said about civic renewal. And so this notion of what to do afterwards, I think it's a two-pronged thing about affordability and
Yeah, for
economic
sure.
mobility and
Number one.
civic
Yeah.
renewal. And I think that
Yeah.
that becomes a very important way, since, of course, I'm talking about the past, you're already talking about the future and the present and the future. I think that becomes a very important way of what do we do going forward. So to me, it
Absolutely.
comes down to things like critical thinking and
Mm.
how we organize schools and
Mhm.
how we organize curriculum so that we actually engage in the practice of critical thinking. But I
Yeah.
think you also said the practice of trust and love thy neighbor is really important about that as well. And I'm curious as to
Yeah.
what you think about that.
I agree with you, and I want to just emphasize my agreement with your first point about we've got to deal with affordability, because that's
Yeah.
one of and this concentration of power and what that has done in terms of widening the wealth gap, and I mean the income gap. I mean, prices are up, profits are up, wages are flat, right? And you look at the last numbers I saw, millennials, it are 50% more likely to do better than their parents versus the earliest boomers, which were 90% more likely to do better than their parents,
Yeah,
right?
exactly
So
right.
the connection between the failure, part of the measure of the failure of the system is this wealth gap, this inequity that is prevalent, is pervasive. And then again, what that does to sow distrust and mistrust. But to your point about so my whole offering about proposal about we need a project of civic renewal includes understanding that if we're going to deal with the relationship of trust, one, we have to acknowledge that there's probably as worse or worse than ever a profound distrust between and among the American people.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, not just can I trust that I can, leave my front door unlocked, but can I trust that you are not a threat to my very existence? This stuff is deep, Randy. It's
It is
deep.
really deep.
And we've got to, and so then how do we deal with that? Well, part of it, again, is I think, we know this in politics. Consultants will talk about the fact that you can put $1 million into a TV commercial in a campaign, but the most effective opinion leader is going to be somebody's peer, somebody they know, teachers, neighbors, right? So one of the subparts to my proposal about a project of civic renewal is we have to adopt come back to the neighbor to neighbor approach,
Mm-hmm.
literally the neighbor to neighbor approach, right? Because we can't only think about it from who's president on down. We also have to reinvest in a culture that values the neighbor to neighbor approach, reinvest in a culture that says, when I look in the face of a stranger, I see a neighbor, right? That's part of what has to happen, because to your point, one has to ask, what is going on in terms of the culture?
Right.
Right? And are we falling into a place where it is acceptable as part of the mores of our society, that it is acceptable that we are purely transactional,
And
right?
in
That our motivation is not grounded in what is morally right, what is ethically right, what is grounded in principle and value, and not to mention the rule of law, right? And anyway, I could go
and
on and on,
no,
but
it's great.
we're
But
coming
look,
up.
see the slide that is up as we're talking
Yeah,
was
yeah,
from Minnesota. And
Minnesota,
I would say in
neighbors
looking
that,
at
yeah,
and watching the mutual aid that is happening in Minnesota right
yep,
now, and
yep,
in the last several weeks, that is exactly your point. And people
yep,
have been saying, people have been watching the demonstrations, but the mutual aid of
mhm,
the fighting
yep,
for our neighbors and seeing our immigrant friends as our neighbors, not as
yes,
strangers,
right,
and how faith community, labor community, communities themselves, we
yeah,
have community schools in Minneapolis just like some of the churches that have served as basically the places where mutual aid is imparted, the
That's
places
great.
where food is delivered from. But
Yeah.
but your notion, I think that notion is something that I'm now seeing in almost
Yeah.
everywhere where there's been a kind of, well, we're not going to let our neighbors
A
be
counter
disappeared.
force to the abuse of
Exactly.
power. Yeah.
Exactly.
And you're right.
And
I mean, in Minneapolis, just look at what we've been seeing. It's so fantastic. People
yeah,
coming out with their whistles, their
exactly.
smartphones, and videotaping, and with perfect strangers, and aiding perfect strangers. It's been so
Exactly.
beautiful to see. And again, this is what I mean about we have the light inside of us. Like we got to focus on this, which is that when people band together and we remember the strength of community and we
Exactly
remember
right.
the strength of coalition and the power in, it's cliche, the power in the numbers, right? I mean, this is the antithesis of what we're seeing with these titans of industry who have been
Exactly.
capitulating full time instead of remembering that age old thing. There's power in numbers. Why aren't they banding together? Because they know this stuff is wrong.
Right.
Right, but they're worried about retribution or getting their merger not being granted or whatever.
Yeah.
But the power of numbers, like that's part of just that age. We teach that to kids, right? And that's in this I don't know what it is, this image that you have put up. Look at that. Look at all these people
Yeah.
coming
No,
together.
it was unbelievable. I mean, I
And
was
that's
really,
movements
I
are
was
about,
struck.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was struck by, and it was, I have been struck by the number of people that have been out there on No Kings. And I've been
Yeah.
struck by the number of people who are out there in Minnesota. And I've
Yeah.
been struck by the fact that people around the country, I mean, I think you're right. There are two countries right now, but I do think that what you're talking about, and then I want to get to affordability, but because I've been dying to ask you the tariff question since I saw the Supreme Court basically saying, yes, tariffs are a tax. And I remember you saying on and on and on, tariffs
Trump
are a
tax.
tax.
I know.
Yes.
I was calling it the Trump tax.
The Trump tax.
Apparently I heard from a few people, one of the most Googled questions the day after the election, what is a tariff? And so during the campaign, the concept of tariff is outside the experience of people's everyday lives, especially historically, because they haven't been used the way that this guy is doing it. And yeah, I used to call it a Trump tax during the campaign. And that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
So when I saw the judges he appointed, well, yes, it was Robert's decision, but I saw the judges he appointed, concur with it being called a tax. I have to say, I did giggle. It said,
I know,
"Oh,
Randy, and I agree with you.
I heard that word. I heard that word before."
I agree with you on that point about it's a tax, and they acknowledged it. But the one thing that I would caution us about in terms of that ruling, a lot of people like us and our friends got really excited about that.
Yeah.
And the reality is this court, let's not get happy about basically the crumbs they give us on the table when this court has from their ruling in 24 about the president has immunity for whatever he does in office. You talk about Minneapolis and the ruling about basically racial profiling, okay, to what we know they're going to do, which is gut the Voting Rights Act completely on Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So
correct, completely agree.
I agree.
You're
it's
completely
kind of a
right.
satisfying moment in terms of them calling it a tax, but this court and what they have been doing and what they are clearly intending to do is to continue to weaken the structure and the protocols and the rules and the laws that we have put together to defend freedoms and rights and liberty and equality. And So
And for the
it would take a lot for me to applaud this court. Let me just say
yeah.
that.
Well, touche, and you're right. I try to find a little bit of joy every time I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
But
No, I
but
get
to
it. I get it.
yeah, but to that point, and I think one of the things that you did do so valiantly throughout the 4 years that you were vice president was you focused on fundamental freedom in a way that most people did not. Whether it was marching in Selma or whether it was, after the Dobbs decision and being at a Planned Parenthood center, you focused on what it means to lose fundamental freedom. And I guess I want to kind of toggle. I'm looking at there's one question that people want me to ask you at the end about what other books are you reading, which I will
Oh,
do. But before that, I just want to toggle these two kind of ideas together about affordability, economic mobility,
yeah.
and fundamental freedom, and how in for the people who voted for Trump, and this shocked me because I was that those two things are not unaligned, that
Yeah.
economic freedom and fundamental freedom, economic mobility and fundamental freedom
Really?
go hand in hand.
Of
But
course.
but how do we, and look, I did leave the DNC, but I am a Democrat, and how do we actually find ways to communicate with people? Because I've what there's nothing that Trump has done to
Mm,
actually help working people or working families.
correct.
what
Correct.
what in addition to the kind of civic revival that I think is so
Yeah.
right that you've been talking about, what
Hmm.
what what have we all learned about the way in which not just to communicate, but to kind of approach affordability and economic mobility? What do we have to do better to actually kind of connect with Americans about that?
So, first of all, I would say that part of my analysis includes, look, I think affordability was the number one issue in that election,
Yeah,
and he told his supporters, he told the people he was going to bring down prices on day one, and he lied,
right.
and he lied, and part of what we have to do is we have to continue to do the work of addressing, for example, the affordability of healthcare. It is, if you break down what the challenges are for affordability in someone's life, they will tell you it's going to be about food, it's going to be about healthcare, it's going to be about housing. And we have to continue to advocate as we have, but we need to be more effective, clearly, in letting folks know that not only are those our priorities, but we actually have a plan. Now, I
All right.
think that for the most part, Democrats, to your point, don't. If we have been effective on any one of those three, let's just take those as the top three for the sake of the conversation. The one we've been most effective on in terms of, if you will, the brand and people knowing what we stand for is healthcare,
Right.
right? Haven't done enough there, but we've had enough progress and an articulation of what's at stake and what we are going to do that I think we've done well. But when you talk about everyday needs like food and the cost of food and the cost of housing, we gotta do better. But part of the point I'm going to make on, in particular, the food issue is we got to realize that one of the biggest issues about affordability writ large is wages have not gone up, right?
Exactly.
Inflation, I don't know that we're ever going to stop inflation, right? So when we're talking about affordability, yes, we need to moderate inflation, but it's not going to just go away. It will not disappear. Most economists will tell you that, right? But what we've got to do is wages have got to meet the cost of living. and wages have remained stagnant for a long period of time. If you look over just, I'll offer a crude kind of simplistic history on this. You know, there was a time when the big industrial corporations had as their first priority consumers, workers, and then shareholders.
Yeah.
And over a period of time, that the priority changed so that shareholders were number one. You can look at what has happened in terms of stock buybacks. You can look at what has happened in terms of, because corporations have always profited, right? That is part of and that's fine. The question is, what is the distribution of the benefit there? And increasingly, the workers, the employees, have been carved out of the distribution of the benefit of the productivity. And meanwhile, costs have gone up. So when we're talking about, go on.
Let me just say, and there's a statistic that I just heard that if wages had gone up with productivity, wages would be about 40% higher than they are right now.
But that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So profits have increased, but the question is where has it gone to labor,
right,
in equal measure, and the way that it historically has. Back to the point about millennials will only do, half of them will only do better than their parents, versus early boomers, 90% did better than their parents, because also the structure was different, right? When you go back a few decades. So, when we talk about what we need to do around affordability, it includes thinking about how are we going to increase wages? And how are we, and part of when I think about a project of civic renewal, it has to be based on certain principles, which includes the fact that all labor has value. And we must give them the work, all labor in society has value. And so, again, maybe this gets back to the norms or the culture or the mores or the principles that, that we apply to what's important. That has to be articulated among us as being one of them. And that therefore it must receive the value of its benefit to society, that worker, that individual, and the dignity that they so rightly deserve. So, this is part of the work that we have to do. And again, look, if you look at the trust thing, Democrats have lost trust, so have Republicans. All these people have lost trust, right? And, so with the book tour, I'm also doing a kind of, a shadow tour, if you will. I'm not bringing the press in, but I'm just, while I'm in these various places, and I've been spending a lot of time in the South, I'm just meeting with people. I just want to listen, Randy. I just literally need to listen. And I was recently in Jackson, Mississippi, and long story short about how it came about, I went grocery shopping with this incredible woman. She is a mother of 3 children. 2 sons are like 8 and 7. She's got a toddler daughter. She likes to do hair, but she needs to get a certificate so she can actually, so she's going to cosmetology school, putting herself through cosmetology school, getting the kids to school every day. Her weekly budget for the 4 of them for food is $150. And she's also receiving some SNAP benefits. I go to the grocery store with her, and basically, at one point I looked in the cart and I said, well, what is in the cart for you? Because she's picking out all the stuff for the kids. And that was the only time where she broke down crying. Yeah. This woman otherwise had great dignity and poise. And she said, well, whatever they don't eat, I'll eat whatever's left over. We go and she's getting a bunch of bottled water. And I said, so no drinking from the tap, huh? She said, the water coming out the tap is brown. Sometimes it's so bad she can't bathe her children in it. Yep. Right? This is in a red state with elected leaders who consistently vote against SNAP benefits, who consistently vote against what we need to do around the environment so that there's not toxic water coming out of her tap to bathe her babies, much less to drink. And, you know, so when we talk about affordability and we talk about the quality of life and what quality of life can people afford, right? Because ultimately it is about food, it is about medicine, it is about education, it is about the quality of life they can afford. And, you know, that's where I have to say, I think Democrats generally do a better job of looking at the whole person, understanding the causal relationships, and trying to address that all. But we got to do a better job of messaging it. And again, we also have to be honest that there's a lot that wasn't working. I mean, we're
Right.
still at a place where we don't have affordable childcare.
Right.
And, you know, there you go. Anyway.
Look, I think what you just said about, 60 Minutes just did something on McDowell County, West Virginia, which we have worked on a lot for many years. And just like in Jackson, Mississippi, the last several storms have basically killed the water system. So that we've basically donating pallets of water. We did to Jackson. We're doing it to McDowell. And but I think your point, and then I'll do my last question before we get to what books you're reading. But I think your point about how we really have to go local. We have to talk about issues in the way in which people feel them and which they're seen and live them, as opposed to these big policy pronouncements that K Street or frankly, people do all around Washington, D.C. And I think that and the way in which you just focused on it, I think we have to solve problems that people are confronting right now.
That's right.
And whether they take big policy ways to do it, that's fine. But we can't talk about them in terms of the big policy ways. We have to talk about them in the way that regular folks see their dignity being seen. And I think you just said it in a way that I hope opens it up for a lot of other people. But that is a real learning that I think you just gave, and a real gift that you just gave all of us. Which brings me to my last question, because we just talked about a little bit about what the Supreme Court might do. The one thing that I am scared to death about right now is the issue around elections and voting. I think people are going to come out to vote. I saw that in Texas in the last few weeks with Taylor Remett's victory. I think the issue is whether or not people will be allowed to vote. I think it is the whole vote. So give us some words of wisdom as we end about how we get the vote out and what we do in terms of this November, because it's kind of like a condition precedent. It shouldn't be the end of the story, because if we don't do the rest of it, that's going to be a real problem. We've gotten that warning. My grandmother used to have a Yiddish expression that said in English, "Scare me, don't kill me." So we're in the middle of the kind of, okay, you scared us. It's obvious we have to keep our democracy, but it means this November, but that's not enough. But what do we do? Give us your words of wisdom about how we, let me use your words, how we don't go back, how we're not going back, how we actually win in November, and thinking about how we don't go back.
So, one, in terms of the upcoming midterms, the only way right now that we are going to restore any possibility of guardrails and checks and balances on the abuse of power out of the White House, we've got to win back Congress and put everything we've got in it. And, sadly, to some people, we're going to sound like Chicken Little. Oh, the sky is falling, because we say it every time. Sky is falling. So that's the highest imperative politically. And we know what they're willing to do, right? Remember that redrawing the maps, they started with that, right?
Right.
They started doing that, and then we had to respond. You look at what they're going to do around Section 2. It's going to happen.
Right.
I know it. I don't see any, which means all of the teeth of the Voting Rights Act, the ability of the citizen to be able to challenge racist policies, policies that are intended to dissuade people from voting, that tool will no longer exist. And then you look at it.
1 second, for our listeners, I've learned to do this, Madam Vice President. For our listeners, what Section 2 means for everybody who's listening, it's essentially the last of the real ways that the Voting Rights Act gets enforced. And if they get rid of that, it means the Voting Rights Act is in words and not deeds. And there's no way of enforcing against state laws that wish to be racist. There's no way of enforcing against that if Section 2 goes, essentially.
Randi, let me just add one point as it relates to our teachers on this, what's going to happen with Section 2. The basic argument they're going to make is we don't need it anymore.
Correct.
Which is BS. And they're going to make the argument because they're counting on the fact that we've not been teaching history, because they are trying to prevent teachers from teaching history.
Correct.
So they're going to basically try and sell this stuff to say, we don't need the Voting Rights Act anymore because there essentially is no more racism in America. And that's, so this is what's at play. And, when they've turned DEI into a pejorative and people are afraid to talk about race because they've been fairly successful in suggesting if you talk about race, it's a distraction from the real issues. There is that piece of it on Section 2. But so there is the redrawing of the maps. There's Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And then the third one is the SAFE Act. They call it SAFE Act, and basically would require voters have to show birth certificate or passport to be able to vote, to prove citizenship. I've met people in America, because this is not a new phenomenon, who don't have a birth certificate, who don't have a passport. The hoops you have to go through to get a birth certificate if you don't have one or lost it or whatever, or a passport. And so they are already actively engaged in making it more difficult for people to vote. So then to your point, what's the challenge we have? We need people to vote. We need them to understand a connection between their vote and what they're going to get out of their government, right? Here's what I'm going to offer you, and I think it's going to be a bit controversial, but I'm going to just offer you my thoughts.
This is why we love you. You can be as controversial as you want.
Thank you. I have permission. So we have rightly had as one of our main talking points with a lot of folks said we couldn't always vote. Women, Black folks, we couldn't always vote. People lived and died for our right to vote. They marched and shouted for our right to vote. And we must honor the ancestors. We must honor the ancestors and all those who shed their blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, John Lewis, and so many others. We must vote. It is our civic responsibility and it is our duty. That is all correct and true. You know what I think we need to do? And I think we need to be advocating for transactional voting. I think we need to say, get yours when you vote. You let them know that you expect this thing out of it, and they're going to get your vote if you get it. Be transactional. I think that's okay. I think it's okay to say, you have a right to get something out of this.
Yeah.
Instead of letting these people assume that there will always be those of us who do it because it's the right thing to do, even if we get nothing out of it. So
I think you're right.
That's what
and
I'm
it's
offering.
also
I think we need to do the and piece, which includes it's okay to be a transactional voter. I am putting in place a permission structure.
Good for you.
To say, let's remember history, let's honor the ancestors, and this other thing.
Good for you. I think that that's right. I think well, let me say it this way. I think that people have a right. I often say it this way to my members. When somebody comes up in a membership meeting and they say, well, politics is dirty, or I don't want to get involved
Yeah,
in
right,
politics, or it's,
right.
and I say to them, do you think the billionaires don't want to get involved in politics? Do you think they're having this conversation themselves? They use it. So,
Yeah.
like, these are the people we elect. So you not getting involved means that you're making a statement as well. It
But
means
it's
you're
not only being
ceding,
involved,
you
it's
know?
not only being involved because it's your civic duty or responsibility. I'm saying it is right for you to go into it with an expectation of something you're going to get in return. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
I'm saying that we start to kind of recondition a bit, which is you get something for your vote. And you let
Right.
people know, I expect to get something for my vote, instead of them just assuming these people are going to vote anyway because it is their civic duty and they're good Americans, but we're getting nothing out of it. Because to
Right.
your point, part of how I have had to reconcile my frustration and sadness and anger about these people, whether they be in Congress or they be, CEOs, the what that has felt like to see how they're just bending a knee, or how they're just kind of letting it happen without publicly saying or doing anything. And how could that be? Because I know they know what's wrong,
They
a
know
lot of
better. Yeah.
And so how could it be? Well, part of what I've landed on is because their first order of business is what they're getting out of it.
Right. Right.
They're transactional, and they're not apologetic about being transactional. They're not apologetic about it. They are not pretending to stand on moral or values or principle. And
And
so,
frankly,
okay, so got it. I got it. So that's your thing?
and frankly, getting out of it, what I would say, I'm hearing you say is that if a politician promises that your healthcare premiums are going to go down, that is something that you can hold that politician to. And when that politician says says, oh yeah, I want that to happen, and they vote against the Obamacare tax credits, then
That's right.
to borrow a line, that they were lying to you. And so the issues of transaction, I don't think that that's a bad word. I think that that the United States of America is based upon transactions, and but what ultimately I think I'm hearing you say is both. We have to make people get enough so that they feel like the promise of America is viable, and then we have to create this kind of civic renewal to rebuild that kind of psyche of America. And that's what I've heard you say.
They're connected and interdependent,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
That the civic renewal is going to help us fulfill the promise of America as well, right?
Exactly right.
Because, when I talk about the promise of America, there is the promise, meaning the potential of America, but there is also the promise, the notion of America, the experiment of America makes to its people, right?
Exactly.
And so we're existing on both planes.
So I am being told by your team that I have to wrap this up, as much as I don't want to, which I didn't look at my notes. But I'm going to ask in terms of the wrap up. Well, you could answer any question you want in terms of wrap up.
Whatever you want to ask.
What I wanted to ask, because I thought it was so cool, and I love bringing up questions that our listeners and our viewers are asking. So this question came from one of our viewers who said, what books has the VP been reading? And I think this came from a nurse, not one of our, we're the second largest nurse union these days. So I think this came from a nurse member. So what books are you reading?
Well, first of all, thank you for the work you do. Thank you for the work you do. You know, the book that I read most recently, and I really enjoyed it. It's the name of it is James, and
Oh, wow. Yeah.
it's basically it's the retelling of Huck Finn, and 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 James is actually Jim in the Huck Finn narrative, and it's just, I don't want to give it away, but it's so well written, and it's clever, and it's funny, and because I'm sure that for those who are the teachers watching this, you've certainly read, if not teach, or have taught or referenced that whole story, but it's from a different telling, from a different perspective, and it's such a good book. So that's my most favorite book that I've read recently.
Fantastic. And look, I feel like we have been very selfish with your time. We love you.
It's such a joy
We
for me.
adore
Thank
you. And
Thank you.
I just want you to know that our members, from, I can't speak for every single one of them, but I can
Right.
speak for a lot of them. You are our light. You constantly create a light and a sense of hope. And the way in which you have moved through life in the aftermath of all of this, including, what happened in November 2024. We love you, we support you, and we honor your grit, and we honor your pain, and we honor that love that you have for our country and for the people of America. And we just really want to say, in a way that I hope you can hear, thank you.
Oh, back at you, all of you, everyone, back at you. And it's mutual. And you know what? We're all in this together. And there's so much about this moment that is making people feel alone and isolated. And this convening and everything that the AFT does every day about bringing people together and reminding them of community is so important right now. So thank you to everyone for the time you've taken to have this conversation. And thank you for the invitation, Randi, and all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, my
I'll
friend.
I'll see you out there.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you to Madam Vice President.
Thank you, guys. Talk to you later. Okay, over and out. If I can figure out how to turn this off. There we go.
There you go.
Okay, talk to you later.
Great. And for everybody else, we